I'm honored to be with you here today to present the G. Bernard Gill Urban Service Learning Award. This award is for people who have played a leadership role in urban schools and communities to improve the lives of young people. Bernard was a beloved NYLC staff member and a lifelong St. Paul native who is passionate about the gifts of young people and a pioneering leader in urban service learning. He organized the first and successive Urban Service Learning Institutes, and he worked cheerfully and tirelessly to engage young African American males in service and learning in their communities. Bernard's legacy lives on in the lives of his 4 children and in the lives of many other professionals across the country who are working to increase the capacity of young African American males and females to succeed in life. On behalf of NYLC, I'm thrilled to present this award to Serena Muhammad, the Executive Director of AmericaSCORE St. Louis. As the founder of this organization that serves children in urban elementary schools, Serena has grown a program from a pilot serving 20 children at one school to an innovative program that has helped thousands of students in the St. Louis region through the power of poetry and service learning. She has trained more than 100 teachers in underserved public schools to implement and lead service learning projects, and her volunteer commitment mirrors her professional career and includes serving on the board of directors for the Healthy Youth Partnership. Like Bernard, Serena works to cultivate the next generation of leaders who will improve the lives of those in their communities. Those who work with Serena call her a consummate professional with a passion for her work and a jewel of St. Louis. She's known for bringing vision, grace, humor, and persistence to her leadership roles, which allows her to move mountains. Please join me in recognizing Serena Muhammad for her dedication and passion with the G. Bernard Gill Urban Service Learning Leadership Award. Thank you so much, Serena.
Thank you. So thank you for the award. It's an honor to be recognized for something that you actually enjoy doing. I was told that this session would be a workshop format. So what I have for you is a little bit of information about me and my organization, but the bulk of the time is actually going to be a conversation about something that we're contemplating in St. Louis, because I'd like to get feedback from you on whether or not you think it would be a good strategy for service learning. So I took this as an opportunity to connect with other professionals in the field to make sure that we're on the right track in the work that we're doing in St. Louis. So our organization, AmericaSCORE St. Louis, is part of a national organization with affiliates in 14 cities. Our mission and vision are here on the slide. I wanted to talk about some of our outcomes because we do soccer, poetry, and service learning. Obesity prevention is one of the main areas of our organization, and we've had really strong outcomes in helping children achieve a healthy weight and become more physically active and learn the importance of healthy eating. We work with 8 to 11-year-olds. We work exclusively in urban elementary schools, and in all of the schools that we're in, physical activity is a recreational outlet for the students that we're working with. So we don't necessarily brand ourselves as an obesity prevention program for the students, but that's one of the benefits of participating. The second piece for us is literacy. We're working with students who are usually reading below grade level, who are not exactly enthusiastic about school, who don't necessarily like reading and writing. And what we find is when we introduce them to poetry as a way to connect to their own creative voice, that it gives them a different perspective on why reading and writing and literacy and communication arts are important. So we've had a very good success record in getting children to become engaged students who otherwise were not very excited about literacy or any of the communication arts subjects in school. One of the things that we noted over the years is that students who participate in our program actually perform better on standardized tests in communication arts because of the level of effort and interest that is developed through studying poetry. So then the part that, of course, that is most relevant to the discussion today is our service learning unit. Because we're working with younger students, There's sometimes a misconception that they don't necessarily understand how to connect to community or what their power is, and that they're not always as aware of their role in community. And what we find is, because we start off with poetry and becoming self-aware and learning your own voice, they get to the point where the next natural step is to see how their voice fits into community. So service learning is a natural progression for the program and for the students that we're working with. They become excited about expressing themselves through poetry, and then they want to be out in front in the community expressing their points of views on different issues that are of importance to them. And we find that students gain self-confidence through speaking, doing poetry recitals. We do poetry slams and performances all over the city. And when they see that people are actually listening to them and paying attention to their thoughts and their ideas and their beliefs, they want to take that a step further to see what they can do to affect change using their own voice. And that's how service learning is a natural progression for our program. Because it is youth-led, all of the activities that happen through service learning vary from year to year, but there's always a theme of environmental education. Just about every school does something around helping their environment. There's always a theme about helping other communities, so they begin to look outside of their immediate surroundings to see how they can impact others. And there's a very wide range, but it all starts with that self-awareness piece. So I have a very brief clip, it's 30 seconds, from one of our videos about our program that kind of explains how, from a student perspective, service learning impacts them. To problem solve on issues that are important to them. It's all about them taking a look at what's around them and figuring out how they can make a difference on their level.
When I do community service, I feel good and excited to help other people. Even though I don't have enough money to give people, I can still help them and be helpful.
And that's what this is about. It's about...
Okay. All right, so I wanted to give you some context on how we approach our work in our program, and why I got to this point where I'm looking at a way to enhance what we're doing. So I feel like we've had a modest level of success in what we're trying to achieve. You know, we've helped with the obesity prevention piece. We have students who are doing better in science and communication arts, and the academic piece is there. In the school districts that we work in, you can't really be a community partner unless you can show how you're moving the needle on academics. But what I feel is missing and what could be improved upon are some of the character education and social development aspects of service learning that are being overlooked as we try to convince administrators and school boards that we're going to help them improve test scores. So what I need to be able to do for our organization is bring the conversation back to why service learning is important to helping youth transition into successful adulthood. And what led me to this idea was reading an article in the New York Times in, I believe it was September of last year, and I think I read it in January, but it was printed in September, and it was called What If the Secret to Success is Failure by Paul Tough. Okay, this is a 12-page article, and somebody sent me the article on a Facebook link, and I don't typically read 12 pages on Facebook, but it was that engrossing, it was that interesting that I read through the whole thing. I posted it. I got like 50 comments in an hour. Everybody that read it was really energized by it, so I thought I need to take a deeper look into what this article is really telling me about. From looking at that article, I got information about the 24 character strengths, which is some research that has been around for a while on what strengths you need to have to be a happy adult. From there, I learned about the grit scale, which is something that is being used now to determine whether or not children have the persistence to be successful in life. And from there, I started thinking about how do we apply this to service learning. For the most part, when we approach service learning, we want to set children up to succeed. It's all about making sure that they have a good experience and a good outcome at the end. So this is kind of the antithesis of that initial approach. It's discovering whether or not, for some students, or even possibly for all students, the most important lesson is learning how to overcome a failure versus setting someone up for success every time, and weighing out which one of those things we need to really be looking at. So that's what this conversation is going to focus on. And I'm intentionally calling it a conversation because I'm not expert in this. I'm starting to think about it, and I'd like to have a conversation with you to advance my own thinking so that when I go back to St. Louis, I have perspective on how to approach this work. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is an icebreaker to get everybody up and moving, because it is almost the end of the conference on a Friday after lunch, which was a very interesting time to present a workshop. And I know that you all are probably just as, dragging a little bit like I am. So hopefully this will get us up and energized. So I'm going to have to do this with one hand because I have to hold this microphone in the other hand. And we'll see how this works out. So this is a matching game. I'm going to give you an identity, and she's going to give you some facts about that identity, and then you're going to get up, move around, and find the identity that matches the facts that you have. All right, so you should have a picture or facts. And now it's up to you to get up, move around, talk, and figure out if your picture matches the facts that someone else might have, okay? Okay, so here's the next step of this. You've matched your clues with your identity. You understand who you have and who the people in the room have. The next part of the conversation is, if you're working with a group of young people, how do you use this information to bring home the importance of overcoming failure? So within the group that you have, if you're working with a group of young people and you have these facts about Dwight D. Eisenhower or Harry S. Truman, how would you use that to emphasize the importance of overcoming failure? And then the second piece of that is, because I noticed when I was putting this together and when I did this with some students that, this is a very homogeneous looking group. So if you have an idea of one or two other examples of people who might reflect a little more diversity that you could also use for an exercise like this, you can write those down on the back of one of your cards, and I can get that at the end. But the first piece is to just discuss how you would use this example, and then the second piece is, do you have other examples from a more diverse background of people that you could use for an exercise like this as well? So I'll give us about 5 minutes to talk about that, and then we'll regroup. So one of the things that I want to point out about this, that exercise and this conversation in general, is that it relies upon everyone making a central assumption. So this is directly from the article in the New York Times by Paul Tuff, and I'm going to read it verbatim. What kids need more than anything is a little hardship, some challenge, some deprivation that they can overcome, even if just to prove to themselves that they can. So in my work, I'm fortunate to have some people who pretty much always disagree with something. And I've had a lot of pushback on this central assumption. So I wanted to get your feedback. When you read this statement, or when you think about this statement, does this ring true for you? Do you feel like this is a necessary and important part of working with young people in an urban service learning context?
Dismissed from drama school with a note that read, "Wasting her time. She's too shy to put her best foot forward." Turned down by the Decca Recording Company, who said, "We don't like their sound, and guitar music is on the way out." A failed soldier, farmer, and real estate agent. At 38 years old, he went to work for his father as a handyman. Cut from the high school basketball team, he went home, locked himself in his room, and cried. A teacher told him he was too stupid to learn anything, and he should go into a field where he might succeed by virtue of his pleasant personality. Fired from a newspaper because he lacked imagination and had no original ideas. His fiancée died, he failed in business twice, he had a nervous breakdown, and he was defeated in 8 elections. If you've never failed, you've never lived.
So that is my evidence to support the central assumption, if you believe that any of that is compelling. But I want you to think about whether or not, in the context of service learning, is this important? Should we be focusing on integrating the opportunity to overcome failure as a part of the service learning process, especially for those of us who are working in urban environments? And I really would like some feedback. So any ideas? And I'll come around with the microphone because I understand that everything has to be mic'd up. Ideas on the central assumption so far. Does this sound like something that resonates as something that we should be thinking about, or do you feel like there's really no place for this in your work with young people in service learning? Anybody want to volunteer for their thoughts?
Service learning, adding failures to that, I think that it's important because it teaches the kids how to work through their problems. So absolutely, when we do our service learning projects, they are going to come up with things that are going to take trial and error. So it's important to know, okay, this didn't work. How can we reflect? We're going to reflect back. How can we fix this so that it'll work next time? And that's a way for kids to also build on their successes by knowing what their failures were. If we take away all the failures and just always success, then when they do fall, they're going to fall hard.
I don't believe in blanket answers. Some kids need to experience, all kids need to experience some failure to know what success is and overcoming and how to become resilient. Some students experience a great deal of failure or challenge in multiple areas where there's a complexity of that, and instead they need to see the pathway to experience success, and then they can build upon that. So I don't think there's a right answer. In other words, it depends on the student or the group of students, and just in education as a whole, kids need to experience both sides of it.
I think, yes, to find out where your barriers are and to find out how to actually learn is by not succeeding every time. But I think it's important then to have someone in a service learning, to have some sort of facilitator or a group or someone to help you work through that failure. Because if you just continue to fail and there's no one there to help you or see where you went wrong or what you could do again next time, then it's not constructive. So failure is necessary as long as there's someone to help you make it kind of constructive.
So there were a couple of points that were made that are going to tie into another piece of this presentation. But I will say that I have some colleagues that believe that, and this is, for them, they believe that in working with urban youth especially, that the aspect of failure is less important because they come from challenging environments and they should have an opportunity to succeed as often as possible. Now, I personally disagree with that, and I'm going to give you some more evidence on why I think that for all children, this is universally an important aspect of social development. So I talked about, after reading the article, I got this information about the 24 character strengths. And the thing that I thought was interesting about this is that there's been this research done that basically says if you have these 24 strengths, you're going to be a happy person, which was amazing to me because everybody's trying to figure out how to be happy, and apparently they've already figured it out. So these 24 strengths lead to the good life. And they have not only studied it, but they've studied how to teach these particular strengths to young people. And apparently when you have these strengths, it doesn't matter what career path you choose, what your educational outcomes are, your disposition and your outlook on life are brighter just because of these particular characteristics that you possess. So these strengths are listed here. I'm not going to read them all because there are 24 of them. And it's a pretty big list. What happened with this list is that there were a group of educators that were trying to figure out how to pare this down into something that was more manageable for working with young people. There was someone from the KIPP Academy schools and someone from a private school in New York called Riverdale who got together with the authors of this particular study to look at these 24 traits, and they decided that there's a way to break this down in a way that can actually be taught and measured for K through 12 students. They decided that through character education, you could group these 24 traits into two categories: moral character and performance character. They had a lot of discussion about in which realm should moral character reside and who's responsible for performance character. And what they decided was that moral character was more of a family community set, and it would come from your immediate family and social surroundings, and that performance character was something that could actually be taught in a school setting. So these folks decided that they were going to whittle this 24 down to the performance character traits only, and those are 8 strengths. So I am going to read this because it's a shorter list. And they said that these are strengths that predict life, satisfaction, and high achievement: zest, grit, self-control, and they distinguish between self-control and work, and for them it was school, and personal self-control, social intelligence, gratitude, optimism, and curiosity. So these are the 8 strengths that every young person needs in order to have life satisfaction and high achievement. So then the next step was, well, how do you figure out where children are with this? So when you made the comment about some children need to experience failure in a way different than other children, one of the things that they decided was if they could just test children to see where they fall out in some of these strengths, they would know who really needed this level of assistance or intervention. And they honed in on grit. And the way that they define grit is it's the idea of building self-control that you get through failure. And in most highly academic environments, no one fails anything. So they talked about the private school experience, how everything is set up so that you're always rescued at the end. You never really hit the bottom. You always have that teacher that comes to the rescue or that parent that advocates for you. You know, you just never really experience what it is to just completely fail at something. And this was their analysis of what's happening in a lot of private schools right now. And they're saying that because of that, these students, when they get to their first real obstacle, when they get to college and they fail a course, or when they get on a job and they get fired because they're not performing at a very high level, they don't recover from it as well as they should. And because of that, they're looking at how do they overcome that inherent possibility within those school settings of children not getting that failure experience that they need to really be able to recover later in life. So it was interesting reading about the challenges of private school students, but the thing that really spoke to me was this particular quote of Why Grit Matters by Angela Duckworth, who did a study on how to measure grit. And I have the part that's most telling to me in bold. To help chronically low-performing but intelligent students, educators and parents must first recognize that character is at least as important as intellect. Now that spoke to me because I work with chronically low-performing students. And I have these battles every day with principals and teachers about, you know, the state tests and classroom grades and teaching to the test, and everything is test, test, test. And I'm trying to convince them or trying to get them to understand that after they pass the test, they still have a life to lead. And if we haven't done anything to prepare them for that, we're really doing them a disservice. So it's not enough to just say that our children test well. We have to make sure that we're doing something that helps them with this emotional growth and this social growth. And if grit is what it is that is going to help students get to that level, then how do we start to develop grit in our students? So I'm giving you some, I guess, a peek into how I think about these things. So then, as with everything, because I work with a lot of educators and social workers, I can't just go to them and say, hey, I heard about this thing called grit, and I think it should be included in all of our work and what we do. I have to be able to show them how it connects to some theory that they're already working on. So the first thing that I did is I have a partnership with St. Louis University in St. Louis. And I went to them and I talked about what I was trying to do. And I said, I really need you to help me find some research that supports this line of thinking. And they came back to me with this Erickson's stages of development. And I put in a different color and I italicized the part that really spoke out to me. But according to this theory, at the age range that we're working with, this is a stage when students start to figure out that what they do is as important as what's done to them. And this is also the stage that if they don't start to see the results that they expect from their actions, they have a tendency to withdraw from responsibility. So I thought that in the context of this Erikson stages of development, using this failure construct in service learning is a way to get at that understanding of why it's important that what you do connects back to your level of responsibility and overcoming challenges. And the next thing that I looked up was the Kolb learning styles. And to me, this is service learning. This is, what we do. You have a concrete experience, you have reflective observation, you conceptualize how you take it from your immediate task to the larger context, and active experimentation. So I had to present all of this as these are the things that you're already saying are relevant to education, and this is how it connects to what I'm trying to bring to this service learning experience. So now, what I would like for you to do is to actually take the test. This is the GRIT test. There are 3 versions. There is a 12-question test for adults, an 8-question test for young people, and the one for young people has very kid-friendly language. The one for adults is very easy to understand. And what I'm giving you now are just the questions. This is the test that was developed by Angela Duckworth. It's available on her website at no cost. Anyone can use it. And the only way this test works is for you to be honest. So we're not going to share our answers with one another. We're not going to see who's the grittiest person in the room or anything like that. But I just want you to see, when you take the test, how true it feels for you. And I'm going to pass out a second sheet that shows you how to score the test. And then this is the last time that I'm going to ask you to get up or move, but one more time. So I have these cards, and keep your test with you, but I'm going to try to group you for a couple of questions, key questions that I wanted us to discuss. And I'm passing these out randomly, but at least 3 people should have the same card. So when you find your match, that is your group. All right, so here's what's going to happen in these groups. You can sit, stand, whatever's comfortable for you. 2 things. The first is talk briefly about how you would use the GRIT test for students that you work with. And I'm going to give you an example of one of the things that was suggested to me, is that before working with a group of young people, it would be good to do this type of assessment because it helps you to determine how challenging you might make a particular service learning experience and whether or not a student would really value from having an opportunity to exercise perseverance or some of the other strengths related to this GRIT test. So that's one thing. The second thing, and the way that it's actually being used in some schools, is that they give this test at the end of a school year or at the end of a semester to show growth in an area. So they do pre and post, and they actually include it as a report out to parents. And they say these are some of the skills that your child developed over the course of the semester or the school year, and these are some things that he needs work on, and here are some suggestions on how we might help with those things. So those are some of the ways that it's currently being used. The first example was a suggestion of how it could be used, but I'd like you to discuss first, if you were to use the test, how you would use it, or whether or not you feel like, there's enough testing in the world, I wouldn't give this to my kids in a million years. If that's your conversation, that's fine too. And the second thing is the cards that you have in front of you are the 24 24 character strengths cards. I wanted you to have a discussion based on the cards that you have, how you would integrate that level of character in education into a service project. So there are actually 2 parts of the discussion. Would you use this test, and if so, how? And if you had to teach these traits that you have in front of you, how would you do it through service learning? And at the end of this, we're going to have a larger group discussion to kind of get some of your thoughts to share with everyone. And we'll have about 10 minutes in the small groups to talk about these things.
So, I don't know, we talked about a lot of stuff, and now we're like, now we have to speak to everybody. We don't remember all of it. But I know that when we were talking about the test, we were saying that we would use it like maybe on a one-on-one with students, like kind of as a reflection tool for them to take it in the beginning and kind of discuss it and then go back to it at the end so they could see areas that they still need growth maybe, or areas that they had grown over the course of it.
I guess at the end we discussed the 2 questions up here, and yeah, we think that you should intentionally integrate the character education into service learning. We discussed that we both do that before we send kids out. I even give them a couple of examples of students who made bad mistakes when they were out on projects, and just to caution them not to get into a rut or make a mistake like that, but to think about their actions beforehand. And then we also talked about when they're out there, and the reflection is so important because you can go over the character traits, and then also if the students feel that they've been weak or maybe have failed in some area, it's during the reflection, particularly the one-on-one reflection, where they usually talk about that. And I think that's
I think that's it. And our words were zest and grit and modesty, but I think we focused on zest and grit. And I don't know, reflection seems to be, well, we're basically saying the same thing, but it's woven throughout. I don't even remember what we talked about zest and grit, so I guess I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, we sort of combined our groups and talked about the last couple questions together. And in talking about intentionally integrating character education into service learning, and we felt like to intentionally call it out in an authentic way makes sense to do that because that's where learning happens. I think to make it a point to say, and now here we have hope, doesn't seem authentic and doesn't make any kind of sense. So I think that even setting up a structure around students so that they potentially are even calling it out themselves, so intrinsically they have connected with those characters is really important and just really makes for a sound and deeper lesson. In terms of determining an opportunity to fail, we sort of talked about that and talked about how we wouldn't potentially set them up to fail, but that if there was, an instance where maybe as an adult you see that their endpoint could potentially be ending in a failure, that maybe just sort of stepping aside and allowing that learning to happen is okay, and not to constantly drive where we feel like students need to go and allowing them to sort of get there on their own. And do you want to talk about that? Oh, so our words, we have hope, humor, creativity, and then our group had self-control and social intelligence. And just, I guess, sort of quickly on the grit scale, we also, Michelle and I talked about that. And I think that, in thinking about as an adult, so for me, I work for the city of Seattle, and we've done all sorts of personality tests and, testing the way that we work and how, in a way for professional development, that can be helpful. Now, not just only in that slice of a pie, but the whole pie, and thinking about yourself and understanding the different characteristics that help you become who you are. And so in that sense, the grit test is a piece of that, a slice of that. It doesn't feel like the entire thing. And so I think that if it makes sense to use that, then maybe depending upon what you're working on, that would be the way to go. But you wouldn't, I wouldn't want to just focus solely on that without touching on all those other parts too.
Okay, when we were discussing about the grit, we said that as a group, we would use the grit when we first get to students because we want them to learn about who they are, and we'll do like a workshop afterwards using the 24 character strengths. And we would also use the grit test to ask them, especially as they graduate from high school, we found that sometimes the kids, they leave it up to the parents' responsibility and the teacher, so we would give it back to them, letting them decide and determine from this grit test, how can you determine who you are and what does it make you want to go do?
One of the things we were saying about character education and service learning is, I've seen service learning as a strategy for character education. And that really, one of the reasons people get so excited about service learning is that there is that character development that we see, and that is really rewarding for us as we're working with students. I mean, I can get jazzed about my student learning to use commas and periods, but really of lasting value is, you know, the empathy and the grit that they can take into their future. I think that's what really builds a better world for all of us. So I really liked that. I'm going to let you talk about what we said about failure. What are your thoughts on our failure? You're on failure. Or whatever you want to say. Or about our traits. Whatever you want to say.
Oh,
your turn.
Sure. We talked a lot about wisdom, and she shared about intergenerational conversations and having her students transcribe some
like senior citizens' stories and
mm-hmm. and how in their reflections they learned a lot. Our words were citizenship, fairness,
wisdom, bravery,
integrity, and kindness.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Oh, gosh. I'll tone down a little bit. A lot of what we've heard so far, LaToya and I were talking about with the how do we determine when the opportunity to fail is appropriate. That was a really good question for us because our hope would be, and we both kind of correlated this to being athletes, right? We've many of us, I'm sure in this room, have done some sort of sports, right? Well, you didn't win every time. Well, that could be a form of failure. Okay, we lost. Well, what did you do? I mean, hopefully the coach talked to you a little bit, maybe mom, dad, grandma, your best friend, whoever, and picked you up enough to say, hey, we're going to go out there and try it again. But it was part of life. It is part of life. And so when we were talking about that and thinking of our own experience with sports and losing, that's what it's about. And I think we have, though, become a society where we're trying to protect people from that, and our youth from that. And we can't do that. They need to be able to experience that so that they have that growth that they need to continue to make it through society. Because, you know, we all, I'm sure, have experienced those hard knocks, whatever that may mean to each of us in this room. And we want our children to experience some of that. We're there to protect them, of course, we know that, but they need to experience it. Other things, LaToya? All right, that's it for us. Oh, our cards.
We had leadership and forgiveness.
Open-mindedness and love of learning.
How do we determine the opportunity to fail is appropriate is right now. I can't remember what we talked about. Really? Okay. And I was going to have to present, right? But one of the things that we did is that we really talked about our own personal successes. We took a strengths-based approach and talked about what we have been doing in life and moving on and using basically ourselves as a role model and the experiences that we have. We would share that in doing the True Grit test. I had mentioned about Paul Torrance's creative projective test, and that is have the kids, and I've done this with adults, they write the story about the horse that could not run. And the kids will tell you, okay, boy, this horse sounds just like me, which is the idea about the thing. And then you can take a look at it, because they tell the story, and then how did the horse overcome, okay, the situation. So that's been a really very highly effective tool, and I've been using it for quite a few years. Age appropriate for the words that we had. We had gratitude, love, and curiosity. And we thought it was just really important that the kids say, well, what might this mean to them, and to come up with a tangible, very tangible example for that. And then again, you would see maturationally how they progressed, and then socially, okay? And the idea, if you really work with kids, you'll produce success if you take a socio-motivational approach with it. Don't work specifically on the success the tutorial if they need to get their grades up. Okay, work on how they get along with others, how they feel about themselves. Okay, and you will find is that the kids' scores will definitely go up. The route to success is through happiness, in a sense. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so this is Vivian, and I'm Mary Kay. And we felt that Vivian had a good point that it's important that it be appropriate not just to survey kids, but then what after that? Is it developmentally appropriate, as you said, for us to be considering that? But then what do you do after you survey them? Too many times kids are surveyed and you don't do anything with it. Or not you personally, but we don't. And so should we intentionally integrate character education? Yes, it's not just the surveying and identifying, because what if they score low on grit? Where I come from, we use the Values in Action, which is an online survey. It's free, and it takes into consideration all 24 character strengths. For instance, we were sharing about how we each have different strengths, and you saw that as we named each of the strengths there. It's very useful with faculty members because they can take the adult version and then you find each other's strengths, and it's a team building. Once they see a personal, the what's in it for me, how does it relate to my professional or personal life, we also have the student version, and the Values in Action site has created a shortened version of it for youth, because I work with a urban center, high school and middle school, and the kids couldn't finish it in a classroom period because of their reading difficulties. So they validated a shorter version of the online survey that we use, and all of us have 24 strengths to different degrees. So what we were talking about is, well, if you get the 5 top strengths, you can learn how you can relate to each other. It's, again, what are we going to do with it once we have the results? And so I shared my personal example. All 4 of my sons and I all took the survey several years ago, and one of my sons put organization and neatness 22 or 23. Well, where was mine? 4 or 5. But you know what? Spirituality and creativity was really high for him. So what if his grit is not really high when he's in the 5th or 6th grade? Doesn't mean he doesn't have it, but it's not one of his top strengths. So we have to keep things in perspective, is my point, and also appreciate the differences. You know, for my son and I, we started using humor as a way to bridge the gap. He should be ADD, but he isn't. He just hates organization. He just performs well without it. He was actively unorganized, but I wanted him to be organized as a teacher, as a counselor, these are skills you should have. But he didn't need that. He was doing great in school. So did he need that strength right away? No. Someday he will, and he'll fail. Someday it won't work because he won't find the homework or find something, and then he will learn from it. So we learn from failure, but we also recognize we use the strengths we have, and then we start working on the others. So that was our point.
We had mentioned, too, about the grit, that as you learn daily, your grit changes. And as we need to realize that, and kids need to realize, we need to realize that as adults. It changes on a daily or monthly, weekly, it's going to change.
It's a very subtle difference, but I think kind of important about the character education and service learning. At St. Louis University, the service learning program and the mission statement in a lot of ways is in service to others. That's what the university is about. And I'm a little bit uncomfortable in a sense with that. I think the character part is to be in service with others, so that it's much more of the partnership experience instead of giving to someone. And if you're about giving to someone, I would say it's better to receive because it's humbling than to give. People just give things and think the problem has been taken care of. But to do it with somebody makes a difference.
That's a very good nuance that I hadn't thought about, so thank you for that.
It says, should we intentionally integrate character education to service learning? But the problem that I have with that one thing is that based on some of these integrated kindness and certain things, a lot of times in a lot of our neighborhoods, sometimes it's not seen. You know, we don't see it in our politicians. We don't see it in our community leaders. We don't see it in our neighbor. Like we want to tell our kids, you know, you need to trust somebody. But what if that person that we went to trust, they turned their back on us when we needed the most? Or what if we, you know, when they're making laws and stuff like that, they come to our neighborhood during voting time, but any other time they're no longer around. So it's really, somehow in between those two, it has to be a connected point where, like how Michelle said that every day it's going to change. And my thing is, like, we need to tell need to tell young people, life is about a learning experience. Every day it's going to change. But if you keep coming up and you keep showing up, you're the future. And then we might not see it in our generation, but you guys might see it in yours.
Any other final comments? All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for your feedback, your participation. This is a really interesting topic for me, and I have lots of perspective from all of you, so I appreciate hearing from you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.